Rescue Team Delta calling base. Visibility down to 20 feet. No response from the boy's beacon. Repeat, no signal on the ridge. Static. He was just ahead of us, then silence. It always begins the same way. A clear morning, the smell of pine needles and cold air, the kind of quiet that presses against your ears until you can hear your own heartbeat. Then a name shouted once, twice, and nothing answers back, but the wind. Every year in the vast wildlands of North America, hikers, children, and seasoned outdoorsmen walk into the trees and never walk out again. Their tracks end abruptly. Their clothes are later found neatly folded, or turned inside out. Sometimes miles uphill in terrain no human child could climb. Sometimes they're gone forever. The files would later be collected under one name, Missing 411, a phrase that has since become both an archive and a warning. The first record we have is from Colorado, 1999. A 3-year-old named Jared Atadero, a light jacket, new hiking shoes, a small boy running ahead of a group on a forest trail in the Comanche wilderness. He was laughing, someone remembered that, just a few steps ahead, when the adults turned a corner. They called after him. No answer. By the time they reached the next bend, he was gone. Search teams scoured the ridges for weeks. Dogs caught a scent, lost it, caught it again. Helicopters circled. Volunteers combed the valley. Years later, pieces of Jared's clothing would be found far above the trail, too far for a child to have climbed, turned inside out, still intact, a single tooth, a sneaker, and nothing else. He was just ahead of us, one of the searchers said on a recorded interview, voice trembling, then silence. But that wasn't the first time, nor the last. In 1958, in the same Rocky Mountains, a 10-year-old boy named Bobby Bisup vanished near a Catholic summer camp. He was partially deaf, but loved fishing. He'd been told to come back to camp before dark. He packed up his rod, walked the short path toward the cabins, and never arrived. For 9 days, more than 400 men searched those woods. Rangers, air patrol, priests, scouts. They swept every ridge, every creek, every hollow. On the 9th day, a priest spotted something glinting in the sunlight, a hearing aid, caught on a branch high above the search line. Nearby, scraps of clothing, weathered, torn, almost placed. That area had already been searched. Twice. No body was ever found. Just the echo of a name shouted into pine and silence. By the late 1960s, whispers began to circulate through park rangers and rescue teams. Unwritten rules. Don't split up. Mark your last known point. Never assume a disappearance is just a lost hiker. 1969, Great Smoky Mountains. A family campout. Father's Day weekend. A little boy, Dennis Martin, playing hide-and-seek with other kids. He hides behind a bush just a few meters from his father. They count to 10. The other children jump out laughing. Dennis does not. Within minutes, the family is shouting his name. Rain moves in fast, drenching the hills, washing away footprints. The largest search in park history begins. Thousands of people, helicopters, dogs, soldiers, nothing. Somewhere near dusk, on the 3rd day, a man miles away reports hearing a scream, human, but not quite. The sound came from deep within a ravine. When rescuers reach the spot, they find nothing. In the field log, one ranger writes a single line. No trace, no noise, only wind through grass. Another note crossed out, later rewritten. He was just ahead of us, then silence. It is this repetition that begins to feel unnatural. Different states, different decades. The same phrases in different handwriting. The scent ended suddenly. The shoes were clean. The trail stopped on a slope. Even the dates sometimes rhyme. June, October, early morning, perfect weather, sudden fog. Animals that refuse to track any further, as if they sense something humans can't. The Missing 411 files don't claim a single explanation. They only gather anomalies, patterns, what law enforcement calls clusters. A child disappears near water. A hunter vanishes between 2 ridges. A woman is found days later, disoriented, barefoot, miles away from where she entered the forest, unable to explain how she crossed rivers or cliffs. And then there are the items. Shoes neatly side by side. A folded jacket. A backpack zipped and placed on a stump. It is as if someone or something paused the moment before death, rearranged the scene, and erased the person. In 1983, in Washington's Alpine Lakes wilderness, Keith Parkins, a young man experienced in backcountry routes, set out with a friend. They split for a short section, a common practice. Only one returned. Keith's tracks were found leading away from camp, then looping back, then away again. 2 sets of tracks, one smaller, one larger, intersected near a creek. Beyond that point, nothing. Searchers described it as like chasing a ghost that kept rewriting the map. One of them, interviewed years later, said quietly, "We followed the prints until they just stopped, like someone lifted him up." Then decades earlier, 1928, the Grand Canyon. A couple, Bessie and Glenn Hyde, newlyweds, attempting to navigate the Colorado River by homemade boat. They were last seen smiling, waving from the deck as they disappeared into the canyon's next bend. Days later, their boat was found upright, tethered to the shore, provisions untouched. Inside, a camera, journals, blank pages waiting for the next entry that never came. The river carried no bodies, no torn clothing, no footprints on the sand, just the faint sound of water against wood. One ranger's log entry in pencil in all caps: boat found, crew not found, conditions calm. Below it in smaller letters added later they were just ahead. Then silence. Over the decades, skeptics have offered explanations: hypothermia, animal attack, disorientation, the chaos of nature, all true, all possible. But then there are the cases that refuse to fit. Clothes reversed. Tooth found on a ridge unreachable by foot. Rain that falls at the exact moment a child vanishes. Voices heard through static on rescue radios, unidentified, untraceable. In one instance, a rescuer swore he heard his own voice calling his name from the canyon below. He never mentioned it in the official report, but he wrote it years later on the back of a map he kept hidden. If you line up the dates, 1958, 1969, 1983, 1999, you can almost draw a line through them, a curve of vanishing points across the American wilderness. Different times, same silence. A pattern that suggests not coincidence, but continuity, not accidents, but echoes. Perhaps that's what the forest keeps: the echoes of those who entered and never returned. Not ghosts exactly, but absences that hum beneath the wind. Archival audio, static rising, Team Delta calling base. Footprints end near the ridge. Checking elevation marker now. Wait, crackling, then silence. He was just ahead of us, then static. Somewhere in another forest, another name will be called tomorrow. Another trail will split. Another echo will return nothing but air. The woods are patient. The river's quieter than truth. And the silence always closer than we think. It began not as a myth, but as a pattern too strange, too persistent to ignore. Across the span of decades, different parks, different states, files began to echo one another. Dates, locations, circumstances, and above all the silence at the end. It was a former lawman who first noticed the rhythm behind the randomness. His name was David Paulides, a retired police detective from California. He wasn't searching for mysteries, he was simply following reports of missing persons in America's wilderness areas. But as he read through the archives, something caught his attention. The cases that didn't behave like ordinary disappearances. People who should have been found, weren't. Dogs that should have tracked scent, refused. Bodies that should have decayed, appeared preserved, misplaced, or perfectly arranged. Paulides began documenting them one by one under a project he would later title Missing 411. The number doesn't refer to a code or a date or even a police term. It's shorthand taken from the phone number 411, the old dial code for information. A fitting irony, because in these cases, information is the one thing that never arrives. He filed Freedom of Information Act requests to multiple national park offices asking for their lists of missing persons. Most refused to release them. Some claimed no centralized record existed. Others charged thousands of dollars in administrative costs. The deeper he dug, the stranger the bureaucracy became, as if the wilderness itself had built a wall around its secrets. So Paulides turned to local archives, county newspapers, rescue logs, and eyewitness accounts. He began mapping clusters, geographical zones where vanishings repeated over time. Colorado, Great Smoky Mountains, Yosemite, Crater Lake, the Adirondacks. 5 decades, hundreds of names, one recurring geometry of absence. At first glance, these are merely tragedies of nature. Mountain weather, hypothermia, falls, human error. But then come the details, the little patterns that don't fit the human script. In many cases, the missing are found far from logical routes, uphill, not downhill. Children 3 years old discovered miles away over ridges adults struggle to climb. Shoes missing, yet feet clean. Clothes removed, sometimes folded, sometimes turned inside out, as if reversed in haste or by invisible hands. Weather, too, plays a cruel role. Time and again, rescuers report the same phenomenon: a sudden shift. A clear day turns to fog. A cold front sweeps in. Rain erases scent trails within minutes of the disappearance. It happens so frequently, Paulides called it the weather wall, as if nature itself moves to protect the scene. The canine element is another thread that refuses to unravel cleanly. Search and rescue dogs, normally infallible in tracking, either lose the scent abruptly or refuse to follow it. Handlers describe animals becoming agitated, even frightened at certain points along the trail. They circle once, then lie down. End of track. In official logs, it's marked as inconclusive. In Missing 411, it becomes a symbol of something the senses can detect but the mind can't explain. As the book spread, so did the interpretations. To some, Missing 411 is simply a study in statistical anomaly, a mirror showing how random tragedy can appear patterned if one looks long enough. To others, it is a catalog of the uncanny proof that the wilderness is not as empty as we think. Paulides himself never claims a single cause. He rejects easy theories, serial killers, animal attacks, aliens, portals, leaving the canvas intentionally incomplete. He says only this: the data speaks for itself. Yet in the silence of that refusal, imagination blooms. Podcasts, forums, and YouTube documentaries dissect each case like sacred text. Every photo of a missing hiker becomes an icon. every timestamp a ritual. People draw maps linking Yosemite to Mount Shasta, Shasta to Crater Lake to the Rockies, as if mapping constellations, not coordinates. Within that fascination lies a darker question. Why are we drawn to disappearances? Maybe because in the forest, the line between vanishing and existing is thin enough to step over without knowing. Maybe because these stories force us to confront how fragile our visibility truly is. One wrong turn, one cloudburst, one moment of silence, and the world forgets you. The wilderness doesn't erase, it absorbs, and what it gives back are fragments, a shoe, a note, a name carved in stone. When Paulides began speaking publicly, park rangers quietly reached out. Anonymous calls, emails without names. One wrote, "There are areas where we don't go alone, we don't talk about it, but we know." Another, "Every ranger has a story they won't tell on record. Something that happened in the trees. Something they couldn't explain. Not monsters, not aliens, just something else." From those testimonies, patterns deepened. The clusters aligned with granite-rich geology, high electromagnetic readings, proximity to water, and sudden weather inversion zones, as though geography itself participates in the vanishings. Some speculated about magnetic anomalies, others spiritual thresholds, old legends of the Watchers and the mimic voices that lure travelers off path. To the skeptical eye, this is folklore camouflaged as data. To the believer, it's data camouflaged as folklore. And somewhere between them, truth waits, neither revealed nor denied. In 2016, when Paulides released Missing 411 and the Hunters, the phenomenon crossed into popular culture. The cases now included not only hikers and children, but seasoned outdoorsmen, hunters, trackers, military veterans, men who knew every sound and shadow of the forest. And yet even they vanished under impossible circumstances. One hunter was found seated against a tree, rifle beside him, no sign of struggle. Another miles from base camp, his gear arranged as if by invisible order. Their watches stopped at precise times, their radios still humming. Again, the motif returns: silence, symmetry, stillness. But what truly separates the Missing 411 narrative from ordinary missing persons investigations is its tone of absence. There are no villains, no witnesses, no confessions, only geography and time conspiring against certainty. It's the absence of noise that becomes the loudest sound. Scientists argue that patterns appear because humans are pattern-seeking creatures. We connect dots even when dots are all we have. We build meaning out of randomness. But the counter-argument is older and simpler. What if the patterns are real? What if the wilderness is not just landscape, but agency, a place that observes us as much as we observe it? Every culture has its version of this fear. The Celtic fairy woods, the Japanese Yamauba, the Native American legends of spirits that mimic voices to lure travelers away. All different names for the same boundary between the known and the unknowable. In the modern era, that boundary wears a ranger's uniform and a GPS watch. Yet the old stories persist. Voices calling your name when no one is there. Footprints that lead uphill. Echoes where echoes shouldn't exist. Even the U.S. National Park Service, staunchly rational, acknowledges that not all disappearances have explanations. Many cases remain open after decades. Others close quietly due to lack of evidence. But the missing remain missing. And so the list grows. In online communities, the fascination has evolved into citizen investigation. Digital cartographers cross-reference coordinates, build 3D models of search grids, overlay weather data and magnetic field lines. Others dig through old ranger logs, digitizing paper reports that once sat forgotten in file cabinets. It's become a collective ritual, a modern seance conducted through data. People aren't just searching for the lost, they're searching for why. Because every culture, every generation has needed a mirror for its own fear of the unknown. And in the 21st century, that mirror is the wilderness, no longer a frontier of conquest, but of disappearance. Missing 411 didn't invent the mystery, it cataloged it. It gave the silence a name. And in doing so, it reminded us how easily we can vanish from our own world. The cases you've heard, Jared Atadero, Bobby Bizup, Dennis Martin, are only the first signals in a larger constellation, each one a pinprick of absence on the map of America, each one surrounded by weather granite and unanswered questions. Ahead lie more Keith Parkins, the Hydes, and others names separated by decades, yet joined by pattern. The same rhythm, the same final line in the logs. He was just ahead of us. Then silence. Fade in, sound of wind through pines, distant radio chatter. 2 boys, 2 mountains, 2 summers divided by 40 years, and one impossible pattern that loops through time. Rocky Mountain National Park, Colorado, June 15, 1958. The morning was clear. 10-year-old Bobby Bizup, a camper at St. Malo's Catholic summer retreat, was fishing alone at Cabin Creek. He was small for his age, quiet and partially deaf, but loved the rhythm of casting line, reeling, and waiting. At 4:30 p.m., a counselor saw him by the water and told him it was time to return before dinner. Bobby nodded. He packed his rod. He started up the short trail back to camp. He never arrived. Comanche Wilderness, Colorado, October 2, 1999. 3-year-old Jared Atadero ran ahead of his hiking group on the Big South Trail. His father, Alan, had joined a Christian hiking club for what was meant to be a short morning walk. The trail was narrow, lined with spruce, the river running silver beside them. Jared was wearing a red fleece jacket. He ran forward, laughing only a few steps ahead. Then the group turned a corner. When they called his name, no answer. He was just ahead of us. Then silence. Two boys, separated by generations, united by geography and impossibility. In Bobby's case, the alarm was raised immediately. Rangers, clergy, and even Air Force cadets were summoned. Over 400 searchers combed the area, calling his name through rain and fog. Dogs caught his scent near a hill above the creek, then stopped. On the 9th day, a priest, scanning the ridges through binoculars, saw something glinting high above the tree line. He hiked toward it. There, tangled in branches, hung a small metal hearing aid. Nearby, pieces of torn clothing weathered out of place. The area had been searched twice before. Bobby was never found. The hearing aid was logged as evidence inconclusive. His file closed with the phrase, "No remains recovered." For Jared, history repeated itself with eerie precision. Search teams arrived within hours. Helicopters swept the canyons. Dogs followed the boy's scent for nearly 2 miles, then abruptly lost it near the river bend. A snowstorm rolled in. Overnight visibility dropped to nothing. By morning, all tracks were gone. For days, volunteers combed ravines, creek beds, ridges. The terrain was merciless: vertical drops, loose shale, dense pine. No sign of Jared, only the echo of a child's name swallowed by wind. Insert radio log. Search Team Alpha, Day 5. Negative contact. No tracks past point 17. Dogs refusing to proceed uphill. Terrain impassable. Requesting thermal imaging sweep at 06:00 hours. Weeks turned into months. Winter sealed the mountains. The Atadero family returned every season hoping the thaw might reveal what snow had hidden. Then in 2003, 4 years later, 2 hikers bushwhacking off-trail found something on a steep rock face nearly 550 feet above the trailhead. A child's fleece jacket, a single shoe, pants turned inside out, a small tooth. DNA confirmed what everyone already knew. It was Jared. At first glance, it was closure, but for investigators, the discovery only deepened the riddle. The location was far beyond the search perimeter. The slope was near vertical, littered with scree, impossible for a 3-year-old to climb. Yet the clothes were intact, clean, and oddly arranged. The jacket showed no rips from wildlife. The shoe's tread was unworn. It was as if someone had gently placed the items there years after the fact. The parallels to Bobby Bizup's case did not go unnoticed. Both boys disappeared in daylight. Both were last seen near water. Both were wearing bright clothing. Both were found or hinted at high above logical search zones. And in both cases, weather struck immediately after the vanishing, erasing all trace. Even their recovery artifacts, one hearing aid, one tooth, echoed each other like halves of a sentence unfinished. Investigators re-examined topographic maps tracing possible routes from the trail to the discovery site. No continuous path existed. For Jared to reach that altitude, he would have had to climb near vertical terrain alone in deteriorating weather. Experts deemed it impossible. Yet there it was, the evidence that shouldn't exist. In the Bizup file, a ranger's handwritten note reads, "Search area consistent with elevation beyond expected child range." In the Atadero file, 41 years later, another ranger wrote the same line almost word for word. Coincidence, or pattern. Cut. Ambient wind fading into archival voice. "We thought we'd find him sleeping. He'd just stepped off the trail, but the woods had swallowed sound itself. For families, the absence becomes its own geography." Alan Atadero later said, "You don't bury your child, you bury a question." He built a memorial along the Big South Trail marked with a small cross and a quote, "Love never disappears." He never accepted the mountain lion explanation often repeated in local papers. To him, it didn't fit: the missing shoes, the clean clothes, the years of silence. Similarly, Bobby Bizup's family refused to call it an accident. His father, a devout man, returned to the site each summer for decades, leaving flowers by the creek. He told reporters once quietly, "They said the mountain took him, but I think something else did." Among rescuers' whispers lingered the same eerie sensations that have surfaced in dozens of other missing 411 cases: compasses spinning erratically, radios cutting out near ridge lines, sudden pockets of warmth amid freezing wind, the feeling of being watched. Not paranoia pattern. One ranger described standing on a ridge at dusk, calling Jared's name when he heard faintly a child's laugh echoing from the canyon below. They searched that area all night, found nothing, no tracks, no footprints, no sound. When David Paulides later compiled both cases into his early Missing 411 volumes, he marked them as Category A, unexplained movement uphill, sudden weather, missing clothing, canine refusal, physical evidence found in impossible locations. He noted that both sites, Rocky Mountain National Park and Comanche Wilderness, sit within the same geomagnetic corridor of Colorado's Front Range, where compass anomalies and sudden fog banks are frequently reported. Whether coincidence or cause, it added one more layer to the pattern. There is a photograph often shown in presentations. A split image on one side, a black and white shot of Bobby Bizup in his scout uniform smiling shyly at the camera. On the other, a color photo of Jared, red jacket, bright against the pines. Two boys who never met. yet their stories fold into one another like mirrored pages. Same state, same silence, same unexplainable symmetry. To scientists, the explanation is straightforward. Children get lost, panic, climb higher instead of lower, succumb to exposure. Animals scatter remains. Years of erosion can move objects downhill or up through snowmelt slides. But the pattern refuses to stay silent, because ordinary accidents don't repeat word for word. They don't erase footprints mid-trail. They don't return artifacts placed as though by intention. And so these two cases, 1958 and 1999, mark the outer edges of the same invisible circle. Between them lies 40 years of silence and 1,000 unanswered calls. To those who study the missing 411 phenomenon, they are not separate events, but coordinates on the same map of impossibility. A map drawn not by human hands, but by absence itself. Fade, wind grows stronger, distant thunder. In the search logs, the final notes are almost identical. Area saturated, no further leads, case closed. But silence is not closure, and patterns don't die with paper. As one rescuer whispered years later when asked about the Atadero search, you could feel the mountain watching you, like it knew something you didn't. 2 boys, 2 summers, 2 echoes in the same valley. He was just ahead of them. Then silence. Fade in. Distant wind, dripping water, the sound of boots on gravel. Not a child this time. Not a camper, not a game. A grown man, fit, trained, familiar with the backcountry. And still, gone. Alpine Lakes Wilderness, Washington State, May 1983. The mountains there rise like walls, snow-capped even in late spring. Dense forests spill into ravines, streams twist between granite spires, and the sky itself feels closer than the ground. That morning, Keith Parkins, 24, hiked with a friend heading toward a lake basin known to few outside climbing circles. They'd done this before 2 weekends a year, same route, same ridgeline. That routine, the repetition, was supposed to make it safe. It didn't. They set out at dawn, weather clear, temperature 47 degrees, visibility unlimited. At 09:15, they reached a narrow valley. Keith decided to scout ahead less than half a mile to check if a bridge across the creek was still passable. He took his pack compass and radio. His friend stayed behind adjusting gear. Minutes passed. No call back, no sound of boots. Then silence. He was just ahead of him, then nothing. At first, it didn't feel like a crisis. Keith knew the area had a strong sense of direction. But when an hour became 3 and his radio remained dead, his friend hiked back to the trailhead for help. By evening, rangers were on site. They found his car parked neatly by the forest line. The logbook in the ranger cabin noted his name signature and the time of departure, 07:42 a.m. It would be the last confirmed trace of him alive. Insert field report day 1. Search begins at waypoint 23B, weather holding, dogs deployed, expect reconnection with subject within 24 hours. By dawn, that confidence began to fade. The dogs picked up his scent easily at first, then abruptly lost it halfway up a slope. The line ended at a cluster of rocks where no other prints existed. No sign of a fall, no blood. Just one last footprint, clear, sharp, solitary. Then nothing. Over the next week, the search grew to 40 volunteers. Helicopters hovered over canyons. Infrared scans showed no heat signatures. Fresh snow fell the 3rd night, covering everything. By the 4th, the mountain had reset itself. Still, something didn't fit. Tracks were found 2 days later, more than a mile from where Keith vanished, bare footprints too large for a child, too erratic for a man in control. They circled, doubled back, then split one set heading north, another veering east. The prints looped again, crossing themselves as if the man was following his own trail, or something following him was mirroring each step. Rangers were divided. Some said he'd become disoriented, walked in circles, a known effect of panic and snow blindness, but others saw deliberate spacing precision, like a measured pattern. One report read, 2 distinct tracks, identical depth, identical stride, possibly same individual making 2 passes hours apart. But the directions opposed each other, northbound then southbound, and at one intersection the prints overlapped perfectly as if past and future crossed in the same footprint. Radio log, day 3, search team Bravo. Base, this is Bravo. We're following the secondary trail again. Copy. No, it's not snow distortion. The spacing's too regular. It's like he doubled himself. Static. Say again, Bravo. We think he turned around, but he's still ahead of us. By day 5, they found his flashlight lodged between rocks in a creek. Battery intact, switch off. Downstream, nothing. Uphill, nothing. Then half a mile further, a small circle of stones as if arranged into a ring. No burn marks, no ash, no sign of a fire. Someone or something had paused there, or marked it. Searchers described strange sensations near that ring. Compasses jittered. Radio signal dropped to static. The air felt heavy, humid despite the cold. A veteran ranger later admitted, it was like standing inside a heartbeat. Everything pulsed. They left markers, photographed the site, and moved on. But when they returned the next morning, the stones were gone. Everyone. The ground beneath them smooth as if brushed clean. Locals from nearby towns soon gathered, drawn by news reports. Old hunters offered theories: bears, mountain lions, avalanches. Others whispered about the Echo Trails, a legend among search and rescue teams in Washington's Cascades. According to the tale, there are places where your own footprints repeat ahead of you. where the forest folds space so that you walk toward your own shadow without knowing. It was superstition. Until the Parkins case. Field note, day 7. 2 trails confirmed. One appears older light frost. Second trail crosses at 10-meter intervals. Both terminate abruptly at cliff's edge. At the cliff, the snow was undisturbed beyond the rim. No slide, no fall mark, no debris. Just one partial handprint on stone. Below, nothing but mist. When investigators reviewed the search maps, they noticed something chilling. The area where both trails overlapped formed a rough spiral. Not random wandering, but a geometric pattern, each loop drawing closer to the center before vanishing. A ranger's pencil note on the map reads, "He was circling something, or it was circling him." As days passed, hope turned into ritual. They began calling his name out of habit, not belief. Echoes bounced back, unevenly delayed, sometimes repeating his name twice. Audio recordings later analyzed showed faint background voices, but none matched any searcher on the roster. One clip recorded on day 9 at 21:47 captured a low whisper. Technicians enhanced it. 3 words emerged. "I'm right here." Direction unknown. On day 10, the search officially ended. Weather had turned lethal snow wind, collapsing ice. Keith Parkins was declared missing, presumed dead. But 3 weeks later, far north of the primary zone, a hunter reported finding shredded gear and boots lodged in a tree hollow. When rangers arrived, they found nothing, no gear, no tree damage, no prints, only a strip of nylon aged and stiff hanging like a flag. Tests later confirmed it was from a backpacking harness manufactured in 1982, the same model Keith had carried. No further items were ever found. Years later, hikers still speak of the Parkins Loop, a section of trail that seems to fold back on itself where compasses twitch and GPS fails. Locals claim that sometimes at dusk, boot prints appear overnight on frozen mud, always in pairs, always diverging. The forest reuses its stories, and sometimes it reuses its people. In the Missing 411 files, the Parkins disappearance is categorized as echo phenomenon, a rare subset where movement appears self-reflective, as though time or terrain mirrored the missing person's actions. Paulides wrote simply, "No logical explanation for dual-track formation, cause unknown." But among rescue teams, the phrase they used was "shorter the loop." They said once you step into it, you might keep walking, even after you're gone. There's a theory, unproven, untestable, that the human mind navigates using magnetic orientation. When those fields shift unpredictably, perception breaks. You think you're walking straight, but you're not. You follow a curve until the beginning meets the end. For Keith, perhaps that's what happened. Or perhaps something else walked beside him, copying his steps until he disappeared inside his own reflection. Closing field entry, unsigned. Search complete. Subject not located. Footprints end at intersection of trails 14A and 14B. All directions lead back to origin. To this day, hikers leave cairns near that ridge in silent memory. Some say if you stand there long enough, you'll hear double footsteps behind you, 1/2 a second delayed. Some say the forest there hums faintly like static under your breath. And sometimes when the wind is right, a voice drifts through the trees. Not a cry for help, just a calm whisper repeating itself. "I'm right here." Fade in, sound slow water, current distant wind through canyon walls. The Colorado River moves like time, slow, relentless, eroding everything it touches. In the winter of 1928, it carried 2 people into history and then erased them. Grand Canyon. November 18, 1928, a young couple, Glenn and Bessie Hyde, set out to raft the river from Green River, Utah, through the Grand Canyon to Needles, California. They were newlyweds, only a month into marriage. He was 29, a farmer's son with an appetite for adventure. She was 22, once a poet, curious and fearless. Their plan was ambitious, to run the entire canyon in a homemade wooden scow, and if successful, Bessie would become the first woman to navigate the Grand Canyon by boat. They brought minimal gear, no life jackets, no radio, just notebooks, a Kodak camera, and each other. Their journey began smooth. They sent postcards from stops along the way. River steady, spirits high, each bend feels like a doorway. Photographs show them smiling, Bessie in a wide-brimmed hat, Glenn in rolled sleeves, the canyon behind them blazing red in sunlight. A couple suspended between youth and history. Then somewhere near mile 225, silence. The discovery. Weeks passed, no word. By early December, Glenn's father grew anxious and organized a search. On December 19th, the Park Service located the Hyde boat moored neatly along the riverbank below mile marker 232. It was upright, undamaged, and fully stocked. Inside, food supplies, camera, journals. Everything in perfect order. Even Bessie's hat sat on the bench where she'd last been photographed. Only one thing was missing: the Hydes themselves. No signs of struggle, no overturned gear, no footprints leading away, no footprints at all. It was as if they'd simply stepped out of existence. The official report called it an accident, presumed drowned, swept downstream. But investigators were troubled. If the couple had fallen overboard, the boat would have shown signs: collision marks, drag, scraping. Instead, it looked newly built, untouched by chaos. Ropes tied clean, oars stowed parallel, calm after calm, and yet they were gone. The photographs. Inside the camera were 14 undeveloped frames. When processed, they revealed their final day shots of narrow canyons, sunlight glinting off water. Glenn standing at the bow, Bessie smiling from the stern. The last photo showed the boat drifting between canyon walls, shadows closing in, no timestamp, no caption. Historians called it an accidental farewell, but some swore there was something else in the photo, a blur behind them, faint shaped like a hand reaching from the water. No official record mentions that detail. It lives only in whispers among collectors who've seen the original negative, the survivors that weren't. In the decades that followed, the Hyde's disappearance became a kind of ghost story, part love tale, part curse. River guides began calling that stretch of water Bride's Bend. Boats passing it reported odd echoes, two voices arguing, laughter carried upstream the sound of a woman singing. Searchers over the years claimed to find fragments, a torn page, initials carved into rock, the outline of a small handprint near the shore. But the most haunting rumor came in 1971, when an elderly river guide named Georgie Clark was found dead in her Nevada home. Among her belongings, old photos of the Hydes, including prints never released publicly. Some claimed Georgie was Bessie Hyde, who had survived killed Glenn during an argument and assumed a new identity. Others said that was impossible. Her fingerprints didn't match her age, didn't fit. But the rumor refused to die. Because sometimes a legend doesn't need to be true to stay alive. The folklore layer deepens. In river lore, the Hydes are no longer missing. They are still there. Some nights, rafters claim to see a small wooden boat gliding silently in moonlight. No wake, no sound. A man at the oars, a woman standing behind him pointing toward the next bend. If called to, the figures vanish, but the water keeps moving undisturbed. Other stories say the Hydes appear to lost rafters, offering help, guidance, warmth, only to dissolve into mist when approached. One witness, a veteran guide, told Arizona Highways magazine in 1978 they looked real. She smiled. He didn't. The letters. In 1992, an antique dealer in Idaho bought a box of personal effects from an estate sale. Inside, an unsigned letter postmarked 1932 with a single line. The canyon keeps its promises. Some believe it was Bessie's handwriting. Others say hoax. Either way, it reopened the file briefly before being shelved again. Parallel theories. The factual explanations are many. Drowning. The river was treacherous, their boat unstable. Murder-suicide. A quarrel turned violent mid-journey. Foul play. Encounter with another party on the river. Survival. One or both faked their deaths to escape debt or start anew. But none fit the evidence perfectly, because the boat tells a different story. It wasn't abandoned, it was preserved. Like an exhibit waiting for its ghosts to return. Echoes in water. The river remembers sound longer than it remembers faces. Even today, rafters report strange acoustics near mile 232, voices overlapping their own footsteps on decks where no one stands. One 2008 expedition recorded a series of rhythmic knocks, echoing through canyon walls, 6 beats pause, then 6 again. An audio engineer later found they matched the cadence of rowing. Coincidence or ritual? In the Missing 411 archives, the Hyde's case is listed not as wilderness disappearance but as water anomaly, the first recorded ghost ship of inland America. The folklore retelling. In oral tradition, the story changes shape. In one version, Glenn fell overboard and Bessie refused to leave, waiting until the river took her too. In another, she pushed him, his obsession with the record breaking her patience, then drifted away alone. In yet another, neither died. They simply merged with the river, becoming its keepers. To modern storytellers, the Hydes represent the wilderness's oldest rule that water gives life and takes it without discrimination. But to the locals, the rule is simpler: never camp near Bride's Bend, because that's where the river still counts to 2. A curious artifact. In 2018, during low water levels, hikers discovered a piece of oak plank protruding from sand near the same coordinates. Experts confirmed it matched the type of wood Glenn used to build his boat. When examined, faint carvings were visible along one edge, B+G Nov 28. The date matched the last known diary entry. On the opposite side, barely legible, another line. Still here. Analysis couldn't confirm age or authenticity. The carving might have been made later by anyone. But for those who believe, it was proof that not everything the canyon swallows stays buried. Fact meets folklore. There's something about rivers that invites both science and superstition. They move like evidence, erasing as they reveal. They can carry both truth and myth in the same current. The Hyde's story sits exactly at that confluence, a case where official records end and folklore begins. One side calls it disappearance, the other calls it haunting. And both may be right. Fade. Sound water deepens, thunder distant. Imagine them now, a wooden boat perfectly still, anchored in a current that never stops. 2 figures frozen in lightless motion. The canyon walls closing around them like a mouth. The journals remain dry. The last photograph undeveloped. The river forever repeating their names in ripples too quiet to hear. Because maybe they never drowned. Maybe they never reached the next bend. Maybe the river didn't take them. Maybe it kept them. And if that's true, what if they never left the boat? Fade in. Sound wind over empty valley. Distant static. A faint radio beep. 5 names. 5 places. 5 silences that never ended. And yet, When you line them up on a map, Colorado, Tennessee, Washington, Arizona, the distances seem to shrink, almost as if each case isn't isolated but connected by something unseen. Not a road, not a river, something smaller, a pattern buried beneath coincidence. It begins with footsteps and ends with nothing. Jared Atadero, Bobby Bizup, Dennis Martin, Keith Parkins, Bessie and Glenn Hyde. Children, adults, lovers, each swallowed by a place that should have been mapped known safe. And yet, in every case, geography folds on itself. The world misplaces them and us. Investigators call these zones blind spots, areas where search patterns fail, where GPS falters, compasses spin, radios go silent, where visibility narrows not because of distance but because something bends perception. To scientists, the explanation is rational magnetic anomalies, sudden weather shifts, human error. The mind's compass, unreliable under stress. The forest doesn't erase, they say it confuses, and confusion kills. But when you look closer, the repetition feels deliberate. The same timestamp, the same missing shoe, the same storm at the exact moment of disappearance, the same last words, he was just ahead of us, then silence. In an age of satellites and data, silence itself has become suspicious. Every device leaves a trace. Every trail leaves a log. But these cases defy the digital. The missing seem to step between signals. Even rescue frequencies have recorded anomalies, unexplained SOS bursts without origin, repeating every few hours. Coordinates untraceable, pinging from nowhere and everywhere at once. One recorded in 2009 deep in the Rockies matched the frequency used in the 1950s by the old Ranger team searching for Bobby Bizup. Same pattern, same pulse rate. Some called it interference, others called it a reply. In academic papers, psychologists frame the phenomenon as apophenia, the human instinct to find meaning in noise, to see faces in clouds, to connect dots where none exist. They say we invent patterns to fight chaos, that the universe doesn't whisper, it's our own echo coming back at us. But what if the echo isn't ours? Throughout the 20th century, researchers documented hundreds of disorientation clusters in wilderness zones. They occur near cliffs, lakes, fault lines, and high magnetic fields. People describe losing track of direction, time, and distance. Some report hearing their names called, others feel followed. And yet, when recovered, if recovered, they remember nothing. Just a gap, a hole where hours or days should be. One hiker described it this way: I looked down at my map, then I looked up and the world had rearranged itself. Cut, low static, then a ranger voice from tape. These maps don't help much. They show trails, but not where the noise ends. You can't mark silence. Cartographers once called those empty spaces terra incognita, lands unknown. But on modern maps, those blanks don't exist. We've filled every corner, labeled every ridge, or so we think. Yet these vanishings prove there are still places between the coordinates. Areas mapped in contour but not in consequence, where the compass points in all directions at once and north becomes metaphor. They are the wilderness's blind spots. And if you stare long enough at the map, you start to see them form a pattern of their own. Draw a line through the locations: Rocky Mountain National Park, Comanche Wilderness, Great Smoky Mountains, Alpine Lakes, Grand Canyon. It curves subtly across latitude, like a scar running through the continent, or a sentence unfinished. The same silence repeating in different accents. Even now, hikers vanish along that line, their phones found powered off, their GPS frozen mid-coordinate. Last messages incomplete. I see the trail. Wait, I think I hear just ahead of you. Then static. Archival radio log, year unknown. Base. We're getting an SOS ping from the ridge. Same frequency as the old logs. Can't triangulate. It's looping like it's bouncing off something that isn't there. To believers, it's proof the missing aren't gone, they're displaced. Not dead, but elsewhere. Inside some fold of geography that resists return. An old legend calls it the second trail. The path that runs beside yours, invisible until it opens, and then it's too late. To skeptics, it's all coincidence. Data cherry-picked to form a ghost. A reflection of fear more than fact. But either way, the echo remains. In Missing 411, the case files stop at the edge of explanation. No claims, no answers. Just patterns and a warning. We are not alone in these places even when no one else is there. Think of the river where the Hydes vanished, how their boat floated upright, still tied to the shore. Think of the two trails in Washington, footprints, splitting, then merging into one. Think of the boy's jacket turned inside out on a cliff no child could climb. These aren't just disappearances. They are mirrors reflecting something about us, our belief that the world is fully mapped, that every absence must have a reason. But what if the wilderness doesn't follow our rules of reason? What if it follows its own logic, a rhythm older than roads, older than memory, where silence itself is the map? Fade, low river sounds merging with wind. A scientist once said, the human body is mostly water. Perhaps that's why we keep returning to it, to vanish the way rivers do. Maybe that's the truth behind these cases. Not abduction, not monsters, just the pull of nature reclaiming what forgets itself. But maybe it's something else, something that waits for repetition, for the next name, for the next echo to replace the last. Every generation inherits its own blind spots. For the Victorians, it was the sea. For us, It's the wilderness. The spaces that still refuse Wi-Fi logic control. We think of them as empty, but maybe they're full of everything we've lost and never found again. Sound static returns, then a radio click. Team Alpha, do you read? We're getting the signal again, same coordinates, no visual, just noise. The map zooms out, the pins fade, the silence deepens. And somewhere between contour lines, between years, between stories, the missing are still walking. Not ghosts, not legends, just names we can't pronounce anymore. They were just ahead of us. Then silence.